Good morning, Comrade Leader. Recently, there was an interview that was broadcast on television and social media featuring the General the Vice President Barajadio. And he made some statements, some of which I would like you to respond to. One of the statements had to do with his party and his government's contribution to the development of Linden in general and Amelia's ward specifically.
Well, first of all I would say to begin with about his statement, it's really an exercise in mendaciousness. The first thing that one needs to note is that he said that he was responsible for the construction of Amelia's ward. I think I'm older than Barrett Jack Beale. And when Amelia's ward was constructed in 1973, I would have been, 16 years of age, which meant he would have been smaller. I don't know how is it that he could claim that he would have built Amelia's ward and the PPP built Amelia's ward. The people who know Linden will know Brazina housing scheme was the first, which is opposite what is now generally called Amelia's ward. Then, through self-help, Burnham initiated the program, and the first section in Amelia's ward was built. And then after, a second section was built. Under Desmond Hoyt, you had the Amelia's ward extension program, and the additions to Amelia's ward began. And so it is really a sad thing when somebody has the audacity, the barefacedness to actually own something that he had nothing to do with. The reality is the Amelia's ward housing scheme was initiated and built by Forbes Burnham. And for Barry Jack Dio to suggest that the PPP and he built it must be some strange phenomenon. I cannot see a normal man knowing that there were people around and that the world knows who built it and then he stakes a claim to it. It must be some paranoia with this inability to be truthful.
And while we are on Linden, outside of his statement, the PPP has been making statements ever since it returned to office in August 2020 that it has been developing Linden and it has created so many jobs and all of that. What is the truth on the ground in Linden?
The truth on the ground in Linden is that the PPP has not created jobs. What the PPP does is identify a few of its activists and put money in their hands. And they are also bullying the regional system and forcing the REO to give contracts to PPP persons. They had indicated that they had created thousands of jobs through that, no, not the LEAP, the equivalent of Qualfront. Yes,
Call center.
the call centers. But the reality is the call center has not employed 500 people, and the call center is fastly losing as people go, they leave. So the claim about developing Linden is another false claim. What we see the PPP is doing in Linden is that they are taking some of their supporters and giving them big tracts of land on the highway leading into Linden. But when it comes to the actual development of Linden, the PPP has done nothing of consequence since they are there. It was Edgil who admitted in the first budget debate that Linden electricity bill had gone up by $2 billion because of small businesses that were created under us. They cannot show us the employment they created. They cannot show us the small businesses they created. They are into a program of bribery and propaganda. But when it comes to actual facts, they have little or none to speak to.
Back to the issue of bribery. Recently, a British reporter, Isabel Young, asked Mr. Jagdeo about the same bribery allegation. And outside of the kind of answer he gave, he spoke of the person who the girls had spoke to him as being his tenant. Is the party aware of Jagdeo's assets? Because he said you examined his assets.
As far as I know, the government did not examine his assets. And as far as I know, I've said in the public domain, there's a simple way for the vice president to put all of this to rest. If I have two houses or one house, I can show my income, my mortgage. If I can put all of my income alongside the properties I have, and it fits into the law, meaning the correct percentage of mortgage payment against your earnings, etc., then you will be able to say, look, I got these properties through my mortgage or through my earnings. Now remember, his earnings, they did back when they didn't have these high salaries that he gave himself. And if one look at that, one will recognize that he will be hard pressed to show that all of his assets came by way of legality. But look, I remember when I was at Shadow Minister Housing, the People's Progressive Party had put in a rule which said, if you got state land to build a house, or you bought land from the state, you couldn't sell it within 10 years. And I raised in Parliament that the now Vice President, then President, sold it before the 10 years in total violation of the law and operated as if it was normal. It is a characterizing feature of the regime to violate laws and to just operate as if it's business as usual. So I expected him to say no to bribery. I heard somebody said he must ask me if I ever took a bribe, and I can say to him without fear of successful contradiction, no. And I don't have to stutter and stammer.
On the same issue of the bribe taking, allegations have been surrounding the present government for years about corruption and bribe taking. When this Mr. Sujirang claimed that if you approach Jagdeo, you can talk to him at a cost, of course, to get anything done. How truthful would Mr. Girong be?
Well, I can't say how truthful. I can't say he's lying, I can't say he's truthful. What I can do is discern the pattern. There has been a historical pattern of the People's Progressive Party being involved in corruption and bribery. I've said also the same thing about the president. From the time he come out to school, his work in life, he can also put his assets against his earnings and show us whether they were gotten free of illegalities. Again, he will be hard pressed. But there are many people in the PPP who are clearly involved in corruption, and all they resort to say is provide the evidence, knowing full well a lot of times, first of all, people will be afraid, and secondly, they don't do it so that a trail is left behind, but when one looks at their assets in comparison to their earnings, one would recognize that they had to be involved in serious corruption. And so I have no doubt that a lot of the claims that are being made will turn out to be true.
The international community has a way of monitoring leaders. And that's how they've been able to track a lot of these leaders and their overseas assets and all of that. Have we ever approached the international community for information on some of our leaders?
Not to my knowledge. But what I do know is that we have begun to take action to relate to certain sections of the World Bank, etc. We want to be able to, they have a kind of a transparency body to relate to them and to bring into focus the need to keep the government officials here under scrutiny, because clearly they are corrupt. But it is not only in relation to oil money. We saw what happened with the COVID grant and the flood relief. Clearly it was a slush fund for them to have a nice time. And so there are many areas that we will have to look at and bringing in alert international bodies to them so that they can be under scrutiny. We again are heading to become a transshipment point for drugs. We saw in the 5 years of the AP and UAFC, we had developed the investigative capacity of the Ghana police force. They were solving crime. We had seen a reduction in drugs and drug trafficking, and now we're seeing a reemergence. And that raises the need for us to really alert international bodies and do our work at home to ensure that we do not return to this criminal state that is controlled by drug lords, etc. And so it's an area we have to address and will continue to address because it is critical. No one wants Guyana to become a Colombia or Mexico. And we are seeing the reemergence of extrajudicial killing, which seems to be a concomitant of the underworld. And so we have to deal with these issues. We also intend to deal with the police because we are seeing a deterioration in the police performing its function. We believe there are elements in the police force who are abusing their authority, particularly arresting people and locking them up for 72 hours and more when there is no reasonable suspicion of a crime. And that is dangerous because once that becomes the culture, you will continue to erode the rule of law. And whenever I meet with the international community, I raise these issues with them because there is a concern that the police force is being politicized and misused. And if you have a police force that is misused, an emerging criminal underworld, a lawless government with corrupt leadership, then that is dangerous for Guyana.
You had meetings with some international leaders. You met with the British High Commissioner, you met with the US Ambassador. I'm not sure if you met with the Canadian EU.
Yes.
Wanted to meet with you.
I met with the EU already,
right.
And I met with the UN.
What was the general outcome of these meetings?
Well, basically, we have outlined to them our position on a number of issues. Most of them indicated that there are certain principles that we outlined that they are willing to support, and they will do everything within the confines of the principles. Of course, we don't expect that the international community will intervene in Guyana, but what we expect is that they will have to hold them accountable because they are misusing the resources of this country and they should be held accountable. I've also raised with every person in the diplomatic community that I would have met the need for a clean voters list. It should be obvious to everyone that Guyana cannot have a population of 750,000 people and have a voter list of 660,000. It means we children voting, under 18 voting, etc. So I believe there's a clear case for a new voters list, a clean voters list. And so we will take all the action necessary to get a clean voters list and to shift in the direction of Independent Elections Commission. That's where we're at.
Mm-hmm. On the same question of voters list, the government says there will be local government elections this year. Obviously, the same voters list in question is going to be used. They'll take out the samples. What is your party prepared to do to prevent that kind of action so that you could get the goal of having a clean voters list?
Well, the first thing we would have done, is to raise it with the international community. The second thing we are doing is that we are publicizing the issue. And we expect the government to be responsive. If they fail to be responsive, then they will be opening the doors to political action.
You don't want to hinder the political
No, I don't believe in telling people things to allow them to prepare for me.
We now come to this issue of, you had the voters list, we now come to the issue of Parliament. Yesterday, you were not yet a parliamentarian, but a member of the coalition was suspended, some people say unfairly, because the Minister of Housing, Nigel Darnland, actually provoked the
Local government.
Sorry?
Local government, not housing.
Local government, sorry. Local government. Has there been any move by your party to approach the Speaker, although a vote was taken in the House, and we know how such votes would go, approach the Speaker, again, to have him correct his obviously biased approach?
Well, that will be done through the coalition. Not as the PNCR alone, but we have also issued a statement on the matter. We have pointed out regularly that the Speaker of the National Assembly has proven to be biased, and not ordinary bias, unbridled biasness. He has shown a penchant for just disregarding the basics of fairness. Now, as a Speaker, you're expected to be impartial. Okay, you might have been supported by the party, but look at Barton Scotland. He attempted throughout his term to be impartial as is practically possible. On the other hand, we see a Speaker who the only thing left for him to do is to sit in the PPP benches and cheer it from there. I had argued when it came to the moving of the mace, etc., that the Speaker created conditions propitious to what happened by his attitude. This here is also a manifestation of his biasness and his own willingness to go after APNU, AFC parliamentarians and leave the PPP parliamentarians to do as they like. We had a case of Kwame Mackay allegedly assaulting Ms. Tabitha Sarbo, and conveniently the cameras stop working. You know, in this country, cameras stop working conveniently. They won't stop working in Parliament when the man get killed by PAMCO. Those cameras stop work. Now, I noticed they said they're putting up cameras around the country. What sense would it make if you have these cameras and when the crime is linked to the People's Progressive Party, or they don't want the person to be caught, these cameras suddenly don't function? They lack the basic integrity to run a country. They have no interest in good governance. And so, but this is understandable. I mean, listen to the Vice President in that said interview. Here is a man who, he knows the Guyanese know the reality. But yet he goes out and says, when they came to power in 1992, 80% of the Ghanaian economy was controlled by the state. I mean, again, the truth is set a sail here. The reality is, Desmond Hoyt had begun the liberalization of Guyana. GT&T had gone. Barama came as a private company. Omai came as a private company. Many state entities were sold off. And don't forget, they said PPP criticized Desmonite when they were sold off. But for some reason, Barra Jack Deo feels comfortable telling the world, knowing fully well that a large part, probably it is easy to remember, which was left Gaisuko, which they never proceeded to denationalize. And so, if one accepts that a man would know, that people know, that you inherited an economy that was not 80% state control, that Desmonite had liberalized, that foreign investors had come, that many state enterprises, Monishwar, GNTC went, Guyana Stores went. There was not the preponderance or predominance of state enterprises when the PPP came to power in 1992. Yet, Jack Deo had the audacity to say, in giving context, here you telling a journalist who might not know the details a lie. And when one accepts that, then one can understand the behavior of the present regime. That's the reality.
And they were critical of this journalist. Now, some research would show that she won 2 Emmy Awards, and those are not awards that are given lightly. She was one of the 50 leading women in the world that was published in a magazine and all of that. And the vice president and the president claimed that this lady had a private agenda. Who would have initiated? I mean, does it implicate the opposition, this private agenda?
Well, I don't know that any of us met her, so I think that is ruled out. But we have to go to the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter is that they practice people like Critic interviewing them. They have instilled fear in journalists, so journalists don't question them. But when you meet now a British journalist who is not inhibited by any of those things, it shows that you really lack the capacity to handle independent, critical thinking journalists. And all the journalist did was expose the fact that he is accustomed to being interviewed by friendly fire, and for the first time he met fire that was critical and challenged him. And we saw the response. He stammered, drank water, all the signs of nervousness when you are confronted by realities that you cannot explain away. I believe in essence that is what happened with him. And as a last resort, he criticized the journalist. But anybody who listened to the journalist will know that she's well trained, that she had her questions organized. And yes, I think she came with an agenda. Which journalist doesn't? When he sent out those from newsroom, etc., they don't only come with an agenda. They don't put anything that they think would affect the People's Progressive Party. So why is he crying foul? You see, those are not like so.
And currently, there is also the issue of I want to take it on this road. The party work. What's happening in the party since you became leader?
Well, a number of things have been happening in the party since become leader. First of all, you're aware we have a structured program to meet the international community. We have a structured program to meet with our members and supporters. We have been going into villages, doing our work. We have been forming party groups. I wouldn't say where, but we have been forming party groups and doing our work. We have also been training our leadership, and we'll continue to train our leadership. We are taking a number of actions that will keep the party as genuine representatives of the people. You would recognize that before the last budget, as a party, we studied the economic situation in Ghana, and we put out what we thought should be done. And it was premised essentially on a position we have, that we will represent the vulnerable, the poor, the single parent, the elderly, and small and micro businesses. And therefore, We wanted to see resources go in those direction. Unfortunately, they didn't. We called for $125,000 to be the threshold so that a lot of our people are not taxed. This regime that said when they were in opposition they will reduce taxes, etc., refused to do it so that a lot of our people can benefit. We have not seen them put resources into the social sector to deal with things like suicide, which is a problem. They keep the police force in the same old approach of somebody turns up, throw them in the cell. They're not even considered putting some social workers in the police system so that young people who go there who might not be criminal, not placed into a cell and criminalized. They have no vision. They essentially operate as a set of people putting resources in a budget for it to go back to them, their family and friends. But you are not seeing budgetary measures that will improve the lives of the people of Guyana, and that is where we are very, very critical of them. And they have added to that no proper plan to have savings from our oil and gas resources and what we will expend. They just on a splurge. I probably think they concluded that this is their only term in government, because the action don't suggest to me that there are people who believe they're going to be there long.
All right, we can also look at one other thing. You as leader have been going around, doing a lot of the work. Do you have a support group working with you? For example, if you're in Bartica, you would have a support group, and let's say Mahaica or something. Do you have such a...
In all the regions, we have support groups. I've been meeting with all of them and giving them political guidance on how we will do our work in the future. I've chosen to lead it because I made a promise while I was campaigning that I will return this party to a grassroots party in which the leaders on the ground and with people. But we have people out there who will be doing political work outside of what I am doing. We have elected a young executive, and I carry them out with me so that they can get the experience, and many of them will be out on their own in communities. For instance, I know in this week, Sherwin Holder, the chairman, is going to be back in Region 2 and working there. And so there are support groups. We are widening the base, but not only are we engaging, having support groups on the ground, we are also having help or working with professional persons to give us the kind of information. I've interacted with a number of people on the economic question before we actually outline our basic positions on the budget. And so the intention is to ensure that the party is fed by competent think tanks, and then we can articulate our position. So there are a number of areas where we can find support. We can find support in the field, we can find support at the policy level, and support at the program level. And so the party is in the process of regenerating. Well, people are already reinvigorated. When you go out there, they're just people who are offering to help. And may I say, of all ethnic groups, I've heard them made a lot of wild comments I think they're hoping that I'd say this particular person and that particular person, but I wouldn't. We have been obtaining a lot of support from the Indo-Guyanese community, and we are creating the conditions to ensure that all ethnic groups in this country, all of them are comfortable and believe that a government of the future under the APNUAFC will be a government that will look after the people of Guyana. I mean, we have a proud record. When we were in government, we looked at all the villages, regardless of who they supported. We have seen a return to the PPP looking only at the villages they won. And when they come to the APNUAFC villages, they are carrying handouts. They are seeking to pick off some people. They're doing another thing in some of these villages, Buxton, Linden, etc. They are also identifying people who were caught up in criminal activity and using them. And you know, such people are compromised. And so we are monitoring what they're doing, and we are going to respond with proper political positions and actions, because in the final analysis, I believe, and the Guyanese people believe, that they are worse off now than under the APNU AFC. They can try to polish it how much they want, and then they believe by giving handouts, people will just leave their support from the APNU AFC and go to them. Well, they should know they tried it before. They have more resources to do it. I have said to all the communities I go to, if they come to give you state money, take it. But you have to recognize that they mean no good, that they are corrupt, that they are incompetent, that they are divisive, and therefore take the resources, but at the right time, you know who you have to vote for. So I am not worried about all of this going on, because people who they give money to, by the time that money is finished, the 20 or the 30,000, they are back to square one where they can't mind the children. The issue here is not just creating employment, it's creating employment that pays so that the people can live a reasonable life and not run from paycheck to half paycheck. And that's where the problem is.
One of the strategies being peddled is that you, Mr. Aubrey Norton, don't like East Indian people. Where did that come from, and how are you dealing with it?
Well, you know, when the PPP can't accuse you of corruption, when they can't question your competence, they have to fabricate. But hear what I say to them. I taught at the University of Guyana. Bring one Indo-Guyanese who can say I was biased against them. And I got you picking up somebody and telling them to say it. In the years I've lectured at the University of Guyana, I have treated all Guyanese as equal. I don't want to identify names here, but I can identify a number of Indo-Guyanese students who I mentored and guided. And I remember one particular one who I wouldn't call her name. I think she's in Canada now. But she was working, I think, in the office of the president. And she was seeking another promotion or something to the effect. And she was asking the interview who was her mentor, and she said Aubrey Norton. And she was fired. And so I am not worried about them. There are people in the PPP who would have come from the PNC and worked with me as Indians. They can tell them that I have worked with all ethnic groups and I have never had that problem. They can ask the Indian section of my family at Lander, Canaan and Parfait if they have ever had any problem, and they will tell you that they didn't. Now, I believe that they're going down that road because they believe it is the only avenue they can use to come up against me. I allow them to go down that road, But I will tell you, I worked when I was in youth empowerment on the West Coast, and I related to a lot of Indians, and I don't know that any one of them ever complained. In fact, when I was working on things like the night school, I put one in good intent so both Indian and African villages could have accessed it. And we didn't win Tamari Sus like area, but we put one there where both ethnic groups could access it. So I am not worried about people making those comments. What they try to do is this. Once you represent a cause, and I will represent different causes, including the African Guyanese and Amerindians who they are marginalizing. And they try to take that to say you're representing one set of people. But I have represented all ethnic groups where they have problems, and I will continue to do that. And I dare the PPP, I dare Barra Jack Dale, I dare Irfan Ali to truthfully bring one incident in which I could be accused of being racist. And I think they'll be hard pressed to find any, so they will have to keep it at the level of fabrication. I think they should go and work at brass aluminum so that they can use the skill of fabrication there. Just like how we fabricated about Amelia's ward, just like how we fabricated about the economy, let him carry his skills.
Thank you, Comrade Leader. And I
Thanks
hope
for
we can
having
do
me.
this again.
Feel free anytime.
Thank you, Comrade Leader.
Thank you.